Hello, welcome to the Space Policy Show. I'm Colleen with the Aerospace Corporation. I'm here at the 2024 International Astronautical Congress. It's a premier international conference featuring trade show elements and demonstrations, technical sessions, plenaries, and even a public day, which is today, so it's pretty crowded. This is the 75th annual Congress. It's being held in Milan, Italy this year. And the theme this year is Responsible Space for Sustainability. So this episode features some short discussions with some of our international counterparts as I caught up with them. We're going to talk about servicing mobility and logistics, both the economic challenges and technical challenges. We're going to talk about the difficulty in measuring orbital capacity, which is becoming a hot topic of late. And we even caught up with U.S. astronaut Alvin, who is NASA's lead for the newly created Sustainability Division. So if you want to see some of the B-roll and to really catch some of the action, be sure to go to our YouTube channel and watch the video. But I'm really kind of getting the sense this week, it's been 5 days of how cooperation really works into the international sector for space, but also too kind of highlighting the differences amongst different agencies and players. So it's been a great week, and I hope you enjoy the show.
For me, responsible space means that whatever we decide to do in the outer space environment, we have to be aware to mitigate and understand all the side effects that could arise. So for example, as we've explored during this convention, a lot of satellites that are produced might malfunction or in fact explode during space. So what we need to do is find ways of capturing said debris, or just in case it doesn't work, the mission doesn't succeed, we have a way to bring them down to junkyard orbit to send them back down to Earth, just to keep space a clean environment as we try and do here on planet Earth.
For me, responsible space means to develop or create new technologies that could not only help the space but also Earth to improve and to make a more sustainable world.
Responsibility in space for me is to make sure that the access for future generations into space is secured and that we can actually maintain scientific research and cooperation in space like it's done right now without harming future generations.
Hey, I'm Marlon Sorge. I am a technical fellow with the Center for Space Policy and Strategy. I am here at the IAC in Milano, Italy, with Alvin, the Director of Space Sustainability at NASA. Welcome, Alvin. Glad to have you here.
Glad to be here this afternoon.
Great. So, one of the things, obviously, that comes out of the theme of this conference, sustainability, and your role is, how do you see sustainability?
There's two aspects of sustainability that I'm looking at NASA. One is very much logistics piece out there. How do we sustain ourselves? How do our missions operate safely and sustainably? And so I'm not doing logistics piece. It's more of, okay, the environment out there has its own threats. In the military, they think they would call this survivability. But this one, if somebody's not actually shooting at you, it's sustainable. So that's one part of it there. The other part is keeping the environment safe so that we can operate in the future. And that means sustaining the environment itself. So it's space environment sustainability is the other half of my job. And that involves things like that are either one, resources that we might exhaust, and the other part is things that out there that we're not basically polluting the environment such that it becomes a nuisance or even a hazard to us. So there's a part where we have space debris, and we're worried about that, and that's just where we aren't polluting. On the other part of the finite resources, it's things like radio frequency spectrum. And so those are the different aspects of space sustainability at the very, very top level.
Great, yeah, thanks. And definitely there's a wide range of things that have to be considered, and certainly NASA's involved in pretty much all of those in terms of being concerned both about what happens and what will actually affect the NASA missions and what's going on.
Yes.
So you also have a much less common perspective on sustainability, having actually been in space. And so given that experience, what's your take on the push for sustainability, the need, what's important?
Okay. So, listen, being a recovering astronaut, I have been part of the problem. And so on my very first mission in space back in 2007, we launched into a conjunction. 2.5 hours into our mission, we had a very close pass from an old space probe that had been up for 30 years. In fact, it was 30 years the day after it had been launched, I found out. And it was it was decaying itself back down to the ground, but it actually passed between the shuttle, now only at about 100 miles of altitude, and the ground. And I was too naive to realize what I was even witnessing that day. I just thought it was really cool that I'm flying above the satellites, and it wasn't until later talking to some of the mission control team, like, no, that's not a good thing. You know, not every astronaut sees a satellite so close that they can tell you that was a Centaur upper stage. And so, like, I guess that was bad. You know, looking back, and now I know the gravity of that situation. Now, they were tracking it. They had a good confidence that it was going to come close, but it was going to miss us. You know, the probability of collision was very low. The second time I was up in space, I was out doing spacewalks on the International Space Station, and I would describe it the same way Bill Gerstenmaier, the former program manager, is. It looks like a Texas road sign. It's like somebody drove down along the front of it and just started blasting it with an open choke shotgun. And so you see all the pock marks, the scarring. Even there's actually, you know, sharp edges on some of the handrails that we've got to grab because they've been gouged out by high-speed debris. And so, aside from that hazard, which we know we have actually notes saying, no, handrail 3127, approach with caution, you suddenly feel very naked in this inflatable suit out there, where you see how much debris has been hitting me. You tell yourself, okay, it's been over the several decades, it's got that amount of debris. I'm a very small target out here for a very brief amount of time, but it never quite exits your conscious mind while you're out there doing your spacewalk. So even on the space shuttle for my first mission, we had problems with debris strikes. Our front windscreen on the pilot side had about a centimeter-sized divot in the screen. Now, this is glass like you see in an armored car, so it didn't yield or crack, but it did put a good sign. It was something maybe the size of a fleck of paint, a grain of sand. And we also, when we landed, we discovered a 38 caliber hole in one of our radiators. No, it wasn't somebody shooting at us. It was debris out there, being just a persistent source of damage out there to our vehicles in space.
Yeah, I could see how that would definitely change your perspective. It's not just some abstraction, it's sitting right there staring you in the face and making you realize that you're out there directly vulnerable to it too.
It's a bad neighborhood, and we got to clean it up.
Yep,
yes.
Yep, definitely. So, given this conference has had 11,000 people at it, all focused on space, what have been some of your takeaways from all the activities, all the things that have been going on here?
My takeaway is optimism. Since I've been here, I've been approached and got to sit down with my counterparts who are all dedicated people to space sustainability for their respective space agencies. They've got strategies, they've got plans, they've been doing studies just as we are, and it's good to see that they want to collaborate. You know, just like with climate, this is a thing that is a global issue, and any one nation trying to be sustainable up there is going to fail, because it's going to take everybody trying to be sustainable before it works. And so they want to go do that collaboration. One of the other things is that, you know, at NASA we have lots of great ideas. We don't have all the great ideas. We don't even have a majority of the great ideas. And so when I see the intellectual might of Europe, of India, and other nations out there that are focused on sustaining in space, coming forward with their ideas we haven't even conceived of yet, it tells me that we have a good chance of turning the corner.
Great, yeah. And I think it's very clear when you're at an event like this, where you've got people from all over the globe, just how much activity is going on out there, and with an issue like this that is literally as global as it can get. Yes. How critical all of that participation of everybody is.
And they're taking action, and they're not just talking about it right now. They're implementing policies, they're looking at designs, and they're coming up with operational parameters that are all meant to get towards sustaining in space, and also exporting some of those good lessons as we move out to the moon and out to interplanetary space, so we don't wind up with a cleanup there like we've got in low Earth orbit.
Yes, very good point. Yeah. So was there anything out of this that I don't know, most surprised you about from coming away from this?
The think that most surprised me was just the ubiquity of it. That 11,000 people here, and they're all got it. I'm talking to students, undergraduate students, who are approaching me with, these are my ideas about how we can do this, and that's important to them. Me, when I was as an aerospace undergrad, I just wanted to go figure out how to design thundering rockets or satellites. But these guys are bringing that same amount of enthusiasm and intellectual rigor towards being sustainable, wherever they are, whether it's how we deal with the atmosphere by launching rockets to it, our launch infrastructure, our vehicles in space. So there's a whole generation of them out there who seem to have that. They get that viscerally, and they're excited about it. And you get that type of creativity, that enthusiasm, and intellectual firepower focused on a problem. Again, one more reason to think that we might succeed here.
So I'm sure you've been very busy at this event. So what did you like doing the most out of all of those activities?
So for me, I always get a lot of energy talking with kids, and I find kids usually between about the ages of 8 and 12, they really know about 90% of what they need to know in life in terms of even technical things. But after 12, they're a little bit, they're self-conscious, and so the kids between 8 and 12 will ask you anything. And I'm always just gobsmacked at just the really brilliant questions I get, and I saw no shortage of that today, where it's like you got these kids like, why aren't you working for NASA now if you already have these types of insights? And I always go home smiling from that. Yes.
That's great.
Yes.
So again, thank you, Alvin, for taking the time to talk. And I think we've definitely got our work cut out for us.
We do.
But as you say, a lot of hope, a lot of participation, a lot of enthusiasm about solving this problem.
Yep. A large coalition of willing to.
That's right.
Ready to go after this. So, yes.
Thank you. All right.
Hi, I'm Greg Henning from the Aerospace Corporation, and I'm here with a few colleagues at the Milan IAC, and we're going to talk a little bit about some space sustainability. So would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, so my name is Francesca Letizia. I work for the European Space Agency, where I am a space debris mitigation and reentry safety engineer.
Hi, I'm Camilla Colombo. I work as an associate professor at Politecnico di Milano on several projects on space debris.
Well, the first thing I wanted to talk about is, we do a lot of technical work in sustainability, and we develop metrics and indices that we like to use. And I'd like to hear about, the types of things that you're doing. And
Yes. So we have been working for several years on a metric which try to measure which is the risk of fragmentation. So which is the risk that the mission can create new fragments that contribute to the space debris population that we have already in space. And by doing this, we look at several factors like where the mission operates, which is the size of this mission, and also, let's say, which are the mitigation measures that are considered in the operations of the spacecraft.
And thanks to a European Space Agency contract, we have implemented the formulation that Francesca was describing into the TEMIS tool, that is a tool for tracking the health of the space environment and mission in space. And we are now in the phase of beta testing this tool with spacecraft operators.
At Aerospace, we have a metric that we've been developing over the last few years that is really called uncontrolled mass per year. And the acronym is UMPI, it's just kind of fun to say. And really what we're looking at is how much mass are operators leaving in space per year as a rate. And we want to use that metric to relate it to the long-term effects of things. And we found it to be quite effective. Do these metrics, are they sort of a fixed thing, just that has something to do with the mission itself, or do they evolve over time as the background, because traffic could increase a lot, it could stay the same. We don't really know where it's going. And so do these metrics you're working with and indices kind of adapt to where the future goes?
Yes, so actually this is one of the reasons why we looked at this formulation, was exactly to be able to capture how the environment is evolving and reflect this in this risk assessment. Because if you look at the guidelines or the regulations that we have related to space debris mitigation, they are quite static. There are long time that also are needed to update them. So we see from our perspective that these risk metrics give us the possibility of taking into account what is really going on, and have a bit more flexibility in assessing the status of emission and the status of environment overall.
Nice.
And going a bit into the detail of that, it changes over time because it depends on how the mission is, the characteristics of the mission itself, the operational orbit, the end of life, but also it adapts to the background population that we can calculate thanks to the long-term debris propagation. So it captures both the change in the mission itself and the change in the background environment.
Yeah. Now, when we talk about sustainability, we always find that sometimes it's difficult to define what sustainability means in space. And it seems like everybody else has a different definition. Within aerospace and using our UMPI value, what we like to look at is how do changes in space affect operators? How much more often are they having to do collision avoidance maneuvers? What is the rate at which they can expect their satellite to be damaged or destroyed by debris that's not even trackable? Have you guys thought about what sustainability really means? How you measure, different potential futures and say this one is more sustainable than that one?
Yeah. So I think our definition of sustainability is quite aligned with what you just said and comes a bit from what you have in the UN long-term sustainability guidelines, where sustainability is defined, space sustainability is defined as the ability of performing safe operations now and in the future. So also for us, this connection with the ability of performing operation is really crucial. And what we do in our metric is that we want to try to capture both the short-term effect, so how my mission pose some burden on other operators, but also the long-term effect. So this means how likely is my mission to, in the long term, contribute to the Kessler syndrome, so to the cascade production of debris objects. So this is a bit what we are trying to capture with our approach.
And when I think about space sustainability, I think about the ideal, because we have not yet reached a consensus there, to understand how space mission in the future need to evolve to ensure the use of space also for future services. And I believe that this indicator can serve as a measure to measure actually a proxy of this sustainability, and it could also help, let's say, improving mitigation guidelines, because in order to achieve, let's say, an equilibrium of the space debris population or a good growth of the space population, we need also to check what is happening in each orbital region, like we do for motorways, for example.
Right. Yeah, and you mentioned policy. I think I can speak for most of us when the work that we do, we're really trying to make sure that at the highest levels of our governments and different agencies, that there's policy in place and guidelines that can be mapped to these sustainability metrics and indices that we're looking at, and say this is the right way to do things. And hopefully, I'm assuming that's kind of the long-term goal here, is that you've got an index that you can point to and say, we need missions, whether those missions be single satellites or very large constellations, which we're seeing a lot more of. We need those missions to have some index, meet some metric threshold that adheres to good policy in the long term, right?
Yes, and for example, at the European Space Agency, in the definition of our zero debris approach, so because we changed, for example, the rules that are applicable to our own missions, we use this kind of tools to try to inform, for example, in 2030, what do we want to have in terms of mitigation measures? Mm-hmm. And by using these metrics, we could understand which is the risk level that we define acceptable, and how do we ensure that we are still within these boundaries in the future, looking at how the traffic, for example, has changed in the recent years. So at least on our side, we are already trying to really incorporate this an additional, if you want, metric or tool in the hands of the decision makers.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in Politecnico di Milano, in a more low TRL project called the Green Species, we are trying to use these metrics basically to translate the control that we need to, the ideal control that we need to put on the space debris environment in policies and regulation, because Even if the modeling behind a space debris index is complex, an index itself, it's an easy way to communicate guidelines to regulators, to operators. So what we want to see is how, by using these indexes, we can feedback a control to the real debris environment and see if we are able to control it and to keep it under the maximum threshold that we don't know yet.
Yeah. So this is like you're updating some mitigation method that you're simulating, and you're trying to let's say reduce the long-term effects, and once you hit a target, you say, okay, that's the mitigation that we need to have in place. And I think that's interesting because with Aerospace we have a paper that we're presenting here that's doing very much the same thing. You can kind of take all those different mitigation and remediation methods and turn the knobs on things and see if you can get acceptable levels of risk in the future, which again is one of those things that's really hard to define. Who sets what's an acceptable level of risk? I think we're seeing with a lot of the large constellations even that collision avoidance has become very autonomous, and so operators maybe have a little bit less burden to do so. But then again, we also don't know when that autonomous system begins to get overloaded. Is there a point in the future where we can overload that? And those are the kinds of things that we need to keep learning and feeding back into our process. I guess lastly, I want to talk a little bit about capacity. We hear a lot about what is the capacity for space or the capacity for LEO and how that relates to sustainability. And from our perspective, we kind of see that as how many constellations can you pack in closely to each other and they can continue to operate. But I'm not sure, I see that as one dimension of the sustainability issue, because you still have to take into account how well you're disposing, how well you are interacting with all the other traffic that's passing through there. What's your perspective on this capacity?
Yes, so for us, our formulation and then therefore the definition of capacity that we use is really risk-based. So for us which is the risk that we are willing to accept. Mm-hmm. And as you hinted at just before, I think at the moment we don't have a definition of capacity that is completely shared among all the groups that are working on this. And also in our formulation, we cannot, let's say, define this capacity, deriving it through formulas from the equations. Mm-hmm. So in our opinion, these capacities at the moment is still something that the community decides through consensus. And this is, for example, how, the IADC, so the Interagency Space Debris Coordination Committee guidelines were defined at the beginning of the 2000s. So we think that this kind of community approach defines which is an acceptable environment, a sustainable environment where we think that we can operate. And from there, in our opinion, we can define a risk level that is acceptable, and then that's what we call capacity. That's our approach.
Yeah, and maybe I can say a little word on this collaborative effort, because indeed at the Interagency Debris Coordination Committee, but also in the space community, many institutions are involved in this comparison, where different formulation, many of them risk-based, but with some different ingredients, are being compared when aggregated to the overall spacecraft population with other indicators, for example, the number of fragments, the number of collision avoidance maneuver, to really understand as a community how all these indicators connect one to each other, because I think that every one of us is convinced that we really need consensus on the proxies and on the thresholds.
Yeah, certainly I think that the only way we can have sustainable space is having international collaboration. Everybody's in space, and we all have to do a good job of keeping things sustainable. So I want to thank you very much for having this conversation with me, Francesca, Camilla.
Thank you.
And hopefully we can continue this collaboration and bring more people in as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm here at IAC, and I've got two experts that I'm looking forward to talking to. We're going to be talking about servicing, mobility, and logistics. So can I ask you to introduce yourself, please?
Sure. Good morning, everybody. Akhil Gujral, I'm the General Manager for the Launch Systems Division at the Aerospace Corporation in California.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Max Puto. I work as a principal at Novaspace, formerly Euroconsult, and I oversee infrastructure activities within our practice.
Okay, well, thank you very much for taking the time this morning and joining. I know it's very early. The conference hasn't really kicked off yet, but we needed a nice, quiet place. So I wanted to start the first question, just kind of introduce our audience to the idea. I'll start with you, Akhil, the idea of servicing, mobility, and logistics. What exactly are we talking about?
Yeah, sure. So as the name implies, big picture, if you look at it, it is really we're trying to enhance the longevity, effectiveness, and efficiency of satellite operations in space. If you really break it down in terms of servicing, mobility, logistics, there are 3 R's which come to me for servicing, which is, how do I refuel a satellite? How do I replace components? And how do I repair everything in space? So I'm improving the operational effectiveness of satellites in space. And then there's the mobility part, which is how do you change your position while you're in space? How do you go from one orbit to another orbit? And you may have to do that for a variety of reasons, which is, there may be some incoming debris coming at you, or the requirements may have changed where you need to go to a different place, depending on what that need is. And the last component of that is, which is logistics, which is, as it implies, is what is the supply chain leading up to whatever you need to do to be able to make that happen. So how do you communicate with the ground to satellite operations, vice versa, make sure all your parts and everything that's needed is there in place. Again, the big picture is to make sure this whole enterprise actually works the way it's supposed to work.
Yeah. And so this all feeds into this space responsibility, which is the theme of this year's conference, right? So servicing, we keep them up there, we keep them operational, fewer launches hopefully, and then the mobility piece of not being able, you're not hitting other things,
right,
creating more debris. So yeah, that's great.
Yep.
How about you? What take do you have on SML?
So it's funny because we are using the SLM acronym.
Okay.
This industry loves acronym, but of course everyone puts sometimes different definition. So coming from a company which provide economic and market intelligence perspective, we see it through economic lenses. So hence why we use space logistics markets.
I see.
And whereby we put 6 new applications, new activities which are emerging, trying to mitigate the gaps of the inefficiencies of the existing value chain, and whereby these activities, so namely space transportation, where we're no longer talking about launch. It's a broader concept of mobility from the Earth to orbit, but also in orbit. We also talk about last mile delivery. With in-orbit mobility.
Sorry, the last mile delivery? Yeah, explain that.
Whereby another layer of hardware is used. Either their nickname are space tugs or OTV, orbital transfer vehicle, whereby they fit between the launcher and the payload and can bring the payload to a specific orbit or to move its orbit to dock with the payload and then move it. It's really about providing mobility, agility in orbit. We also had life extension services whereby a satellite, an asset is no longer a system with a given end of life designed by its amount of fuel. It's about all the activities whereby we can extend the life of this asset.
Right.
We also add in orbit assembly and manufacturing, whereby in orbit you deploy, you assemble a larger structure than what actually can fit into the launcher payload fairing, and we also add into this broader concept active debris removal.
Active debris removal,
adding the sustainability leg, whereby we remove stuff which are no longer operational and actually becoming a threat. And of course, the last part, but maybe the most important one, is space situational awareness, where you need to understand what's going there and who is moving and in which direction. So it's 6 new applications fitting into the existing value chain. They are definitely not independent, but they are each of them trying to remove the inefficiencies, the risk of the legacy value chain, and trying to build value proposition and exist on its own within this broader concept.
Wow, so you're really looking, you're looking at the market, because you're a market analyst, right? So you're looking at the market across all of those aspects of, it's very comprehensive.
Yes, so we are this industry was built by engineers and sometimes wishful thinking. So, meaning that, oh yeah.
Are you an engineer, Akil?
If wishful thinking was a fuel, we will all be there, we'll all be on another galaxy. But just to say that all these concepts that we are discussing are per se not new. Everything was more or less invented in the 60s or 70s in terms of the concept of operation and ideas. But the fact that these days they may or not materialize has to be understood through economic prism.
Right.
Are there any customers?
Okay, we're gonna let's just talk. I do want to hear
let me
more
say
about
one more
that.
thing, though.
The economics.
So Maxime brought up a few other things that the way we parse things out a little bit differently. So
yeah.
SML was one. A lot of the stuff he talked about in space assembly manufacturing, the use of tugs and everything. We have that under. I'll throw another acronym at you, ISAM, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So we kind of put it under that, and then obviously the tugs part is important because sometimes you may not want to use the propellant that's on our spacecraft, which is up there, but you may want to just use a tug to move it, and maybe it needs to go, its end of life needs to go in some sort of graveyard orbit, right?
Right.
Again, you're trying to, reduce junk in space, if you will. So anyway, but yeah.
Yeah. So I definitely want to talk about the kind of economic challenges, but before we get to that, I'm going to go back to our engineer because. So tell us about your dreams here. What are the we've talked already about tugs and about active debris removal and different aspects of what servicing and mobility might look like. But there are technological challenges.
There are challenges, but I'll just preface that with that the technical community has been working on this since the mid-'80s, right? I mean, go back to space shuttle days, you look at the Space Force, Air Force, some of the DARPA initiatives that came in, they were looking at this from a very long time. The challenge is, how do you scale things up? We're talking about now much, much more bigger industry, if you will. And so some of the technical challenges going forward are going to be, how do you make sure that you have high reliability and you can do it repeatedly, right, across a whole bunch of genres, if you will. But specifically, technically, since you asked, the key thing really is, navigation and control. How do you do that in a manner that you can, with precision maneuver, and you can dock? So again, go back to RPOD, which is rendezvous, proximity, operations, and docking. How do you all of that with that control authority, if you will? And then what type of autonomous tools and systems you need to be able to maintain those type of things going forward. So that's definitely one of them. How do you reposition in all of this? How do you optimize for fuel when you are doing those repositionings and those remaneuvers, if you will? That's going to be very critical going forward. And as we discussed earlier, is collision avoidance, right? That's going to be a key thing as we go about doing that. So those are some of the key technological challenges. Nothing that I will say is super hard to go do, but again, back to my point about reliability, with high reliability and precision and repeatedly is really the key thing, is what you need to go do.
Okay. Any comments?
And I think, like as Akil pointed out, as we want these activities to scale up and people to be more compatible or using the same standard, it's all about defining a common languages, which has been sometimes hard in this industry, setting up standards and protocols. Because if you
English should be the common language.
if you want to dock with someone, if you want to approach someone, you need to have the same understanding of things. And we have seen in the recent year, I think, turning points like Confers, which was created by DARPA, but is managed by industry members, whereby they define together what should be the standards, the protocols. Should we, in the coming years, be capable to dock, refuel, or even communicate with each other during a proximity operation? There has to be standard, and this is a key enabler on the top of all the technical aspect that Akil described.
So the actual hardware of, does your widget fit with my widget? Right, yeah. So what about some of the economic challenges then? Where do those lie? Because I know that's your specialty.
There are plenty. I mean, in a nutshell, it's all about finding the right business model for this new value proposition, which, again, all of them are trying to solve or remove bottlenecks or issues with the legacy activities. So, as these activities these days are mainly pushed by vendors, they have to find their market and their customers. So
right, they're all private space companies
mainly,
that are
mainly. So we supported with some government money, but they are mainly private and commercial companies. So the question is, who is actually looking to pay for it? Yeah. And the underlying question is how much these new activities are adding value, not only to the satellite operator economics, but to its end user. So, and that's why I drew the line with theoretical benefits of SML and how they can actually fit into the real value chain and space industry.
Who is the hypothetical end user here?
So let's say,
give
for
an
example,
example.
life extension. On
Okay.
design, extending the life indefinitely of a payload, of an asset, is significantly cheaper than launching a new satellite. Okay. It's more sustainable, it takes less payload and less refueling. It could be one docking vehicle approaching multiple servicing customers. But on practice, sometimes a satellite operator is faced between the choice of replacing its old and aging payload with a new and much more efficient satellite, which has maybe it's a terabyte capacity compared to a gigabyte capacity for when we're talking about SATCOM. So really, like broadly speaking, it's all about like finding who is actually willing to pay for it, how much does it contribute, mainly financially, to their business model, to the effectiveness, but these days it's also about the sustainability part. I mean, how much sustainability it brings to your business model, and that's where I think step by step these new activities may find their customers. But it's a hard problem, and not all these applications are at the same level of maturity.
Right.
For example, in active debris removal, people are struggling so far to see any economic value in paying for something that before they didn't have to. As we are launching more and more payloads, right. Satellite constellation operator may find an economic interest in paying for something rather than not doing it, because the consequences of not doing anything may prove to be actually in the end more expensive should the orbits being messed up. Yeah. But it's very much in the process. Same like space situational awareness. The price of not knowing what's happening around your satellites is becoming higher than actually paying to understand who is flying around and whether do you need to move.
Yeah. So the active debris removal is an interesting problem, because we have to kind of start looking at incentives, right? In terms of, people used to throw things out in the terrestrial environment until they were incentivized to start recycling and to start, to make it's convenient. And any comments on some of the economic challenges?
I think Maxim covered a lot of the things we talked about here. I think really it gets down to, what is the ROI, right? Return on investment. You have to kind of look at it short-term, long-term, and maybe there's a business case for long-term sustainability where you kind of balance short-term profitability with essentially the need for sustainable practices, if you will, going forward. So back to what you said is it requires maybe a different business model. Not everything can be looked at from the standpoint for instant profitability, if you will. At something as industry and government, we should all consider going forward.
Yeah,
definitely.
We need to start thinking of the long game.
Yep.
Definitely.
Going with that a little bit. So there's this idea. You were saying that how do we find the customer, right? So the idea that government can be the customer. I know that in the U.S. we're kind of struggling with government as an anchor tenant within some space programs, and then how that moves into like actually being a market. A private market. So, which one? Go for it.
I'll take that one.
Yeah.
So it's a very interesting question, right? Should the government be the customer or market economy basically driving SML, if you will, going forward? You don't have to go too far back, right, to the left. Take launch, for example. Several years ago, we noticed that those providers who were entirely relying their business case on government missions, over time, got to a situation where they were not cost competitive, and they got driven out. Right? Okay. So if your business case is purely relying on government, and you don't have a major share of commercial, you're likely not going to survive too long. Now, back to your point, which is anchor tenant. I think that's a good one, right? Especially where we are in the phase, having some sort of an anchor tenant is probably valuable going forward. In this case, what you have is the government acts as a major buyer of goods and kind of sets the stage for you going forward. and then commercial gets developed going forward. So I think there's definitely some value out there. I will say that in the case of the U.S., there's a lot of money flowing out right now through various programs, whether it is AFWorks, SpaceWorks, right, StratFi, and I'm sorry, I'm throwing acronyms at you. TACFI,
more acronyms.
TACFI initiatives which have gone out, right? And so that's kind of spurring industry in the area of SML specifically to go do different things, which is very different than what we did before, right? So there's a partnership that the government is collaborating with industry right now because we see the importance of this going forward.
Yeah, so the government is kind of working to spur that innovation.
Right, and there's a lot of money flowing out, right? Mm-hmm. Not everything's going to be successful, but at least there's some seed funding that, and I'll say it's more than seed, that's flowing out right now.
Yeah, good point.
Because along the way, I think government is helping the industry to move the needle toward like these activities becoming actually real markets beyond just government or government agencies. I mean, government as a customer has been quite good in supporting R&Ds, as you pointed out, Akhil. Even the customer has been the government has been good customers on very like high-end, exquisite mission, which have been technical marvel. Like, I mean, looking back a few years ago, DARPA Orbital Express was a technical breakthrough. But really, the question now is how can government help to bridge the gap between this technological demonstration, mainly government funded, to commercial companies actually maturing and bringing a solution, an active and operational solution, which may address more customers than just the government. And that's all the current situation is about these days.
Right. Any thoughts from Europe and how you guys, I mean, I know you guys plan things differently than the U.S.
So we are mainly, I think, lagging behind the U.S., but looking also, I think ESA has been good through its program in requiring having a customer by design on these technical RFPs, whereby there should be a customer which is identified, an early adopter identified for this RFP. Yet this concept is still emerging. ESA has been putting some money into ADR. This week at IAC,
putting money into
active debris removal.
Okay.
And contracted a Swiss company to perform some demonstration. This week at IAC, ESA signed up a contract with
the European Space Agency.
Yeah, with Orbit, an Italian company, for servicing of a geostationary satellite in GEO. So you can tell that there are things are moving up. There are money put into space mobility, but it's definitely smaller by an order of magnitude compared to the US. But it's definitely of interest, I would say.
Yeah.
And I'll add to that is that for the first time at the IAC this year, we have a separate session which talks specifically about SML. So what better, I'll say, venue for all the different spacefaring agencies to be able to collaborate and talk like we are doing now, and kind of move the needle more than we have in the past. So I think this is really a good culmination. To at least get that thought process going. What do we need to do going forward?
And maybe there's a lot more room for partnerships here. We don't have to be duplicating efforts.
Yeah.
Right. As long as we're partners and allies, let's work together on it.
How can we do things which complement each other as opposed to being duplicative?
Right. So what else should we be thinking about? Talking about moving the needle.
So there's a lot of things that we should be talking about also, right? One is, what is are there regulatory or policy issues that we need to consider, right?
Always.
Exactly, right. Especially if you're going to refuel up in space, are there any laws governing that? How do we
the Outer Space Treaty?
Exactly, the Outer Space
You can't touch other
Treaty.
people's
So we
stuff.
need to look at that, right? Debris mitigation, we talked about that earlier. Any legal implications for refueling practices, we talked about that as well. But I think the other
export control too.
Control
we're
too.
talking about having access. If you want to dock with someone else's satellite, you need to understand how the satellite was built. If you want to dock with the nozzles, with the launch adapter, hence meaning that you need to have access to technical design of the satellite, which so far are covered by export control regulation, either ITA or others. That's the type of information which are instrumental, but we need to figure out how can we safely exchange such information.
Yeah.
So that, and also security along with that, right?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you're approaching a client vehicle that may have a completely different security classification than the tug or an approaching satellite may have. So those implications are there. But I think there's another big thing, which in my mind is educating the end user, right? So up until now, designers and everybody else are building, I'll say, propellant tanks for satellites, which are big because they can service the entire operational life. With this concept, maybe we need to look at have smaller tanks, because if you can replenish that, you're putting less mass up there, and that means it's a smaller spacecraft bus structure, and you may do a lot of savings by going maybe instead of a heavy launcher, a medium or a small class launcher, and the amount of savings that you have with that then can be applied elsewhere, right, in terms of replenishing and all of that. So that's, I think, is a big thing. We just need to educate the end user a little bit more going forward.
Interesting.
Because so far as SML, our activities are trying to bridge the gap or reduce inefficiencies. If people actually embrace these opportunities and actually leverage on them and optimize satellite design, as Akil pointed out, we could see very interesting concepts materializing, which are so far being just on paper, but having like antenna farms, whereby you will have a large truss being built in orbit, whereby you would put payloads and SATCOM payloads and replace them, upgrading them, and breaking the idea that whenever you launch a satellite, it's not only about the payload, it's also about all the servicing hardware, which is supposed to support, which may sometimes can be shared or upgraded by someone else. And if we can reach a point where all these activities are optimized, we could actually unlock new interesting design in the coming years.
Yeah, so it's both of you are talking about like efficiencies basically and how that contributes to sustained presence, right?
Yep.
So, well, thank you very much for joining today and taking the time.
Thank you for the opportunity.
All right.
Yeah.
Bye for now.
Bye now.
Well, we hope you enjoyed this episode featuring clips and interviews from the 75th Annual International Astronautical Congress, hosted in Milan, Italy. Thank you to our guests for participating in our show and sharing their research and thoughts. The theme of this year's Congress, Responsible Space, remains a topic of consideration, from short to long-term thinking, from design to demise, from launch ops to orbital ops. What does responsible space mean to you? At IAC, I commonly heard responsible space means ensuring that space can continue to serve life on Earth, grow economies, protect our environment and our security, improve our well-being. But also, how do we measure success and failure of our actions? How do we know if we're on the right track? And how will the business cases develop beyond governments? So I thank you for joining. All of our shows are on YouTube or on your favorite podcast platform. If you want to get more of the Center's in-depth research on space policy and strategy, go to csps.aerospace.org. And thank you, as always, to James Liggins, our technical director. Goodbye for now.